She hugged him by mistake, and unknowingly touched the one place he still felt pain, his heart. She was at the airport, waiting for her brother with a simple sign in her hands. But amidst the rush and the crowd, she ended up hugging the wrong man. What she didn't know is that this man wasn't just a stranger. He was a reclusive billionaire, lonely, and with a heart scarred by losses he had never shared with anyone. And that hug, innocent, brief, sincere, was the first human touch he had felt in a long time. What starts as a mistake turns into something neither of them could control. Secrets will be revealed, old wounds will be reopened. But in the end, will love be able to blossom where everything seemed wrong from the start? Prepare your heart. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about healing, about presence, and about the choice to love, even when it's easier to walk away. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? Your like helps the channel grow and continue bringing you emotional stories like this. Share with someone special. JFK International Airport buzzed with the rhythm of endless arrivals and departures, the chaotic pulse of a city that never slept. Announcements echoed from the speakers like a distant chorus, and the metallic sound of suitcase wheels created a hurried melody across the polished floor. Families reunited, business people rushed past with phone calls pressed to their ears, and somewhere in the middle of it all stood Emily Parker. She was petite, looking even smaller in her oversized beige coat. Her hair, a messy tangle of soft curls, was pulled back loosely, as if she'd stopped trying to tame it after a long morning. Her sneakers were slightly scuffed at the edges, and she clutched a simple white sign with shaky black letters that read, "Welcome home, Tyler." Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from anticipation. It had been over a year since she had last seen her brother. He was all the family she had left. She stood just beyond the arrivals gate, rising on her toes every few seconds like a child trying to peek over a fence. Her eyes darted from face to face as passengers filtered through. Then suddenly she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, the same kind of stride Tyler used to have, confident but not arrogant. He wore a long charcoal coat, dark jeans, and carried a sleek black duffel bag. From the side, the resemblance was undeniable. Without a second thought, Emily gasped and ran straight toward him. Her arms wrapped around his torso, and she pressed her face into his chest. "Tyler," she whispered, breathless with joy. "I missed you so much." The man froze. A pause stretched into silence, and then, in a deep, clear voice, he said, "I'm sorry. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." Emily stiffened immediately. Her face flushed with horror as she pulled away, looking up into a pair of cold, smoky grey eyes. Not Tyler's warm hazel, not even close. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you were my brother. I didn't mean to—" The man offered a faint smile, softening the sharpness of his features. "No harm done," he said calmly. "Honestly, it's not every day I get hugged by a stranger, especially not one so heartfelt." Emily's heart raced in her chest, mortified. She took a step back, eyes darting around as if hoping the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "I feel so stupid. I'm so sorry, really. That was ridiculous of me." The man tilted his head, his eyes studying her, not in judgment, but with curious amusement. "Don't be. It was unexpected, but not unpleasant." And then, as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, her real brother Tyler appeared behind her, waving his arms. "Emily, over here." She turned, red as a tomato, then back to the stranger, who gave her a light nod before beginning to walk away. "Wait," she blurted. "I didn't catch your name." He paused for half a beat. "Daniel," he said over his shoulder, not turning around. And just like that, he was gone. Emily watched him disappear into the crowd, her mind spiraling. It was just a mistake, just a random, awkward moment. It meant nothing. But then why did her chest feel warm? Why couldn't she forget the way he looked at her, not with irritation or mockery, but as if he saw something familiar, something real? Tyler threw his arms around her a second later, laughing. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a smile. "Something like that." As they walked toward the parking lot, Her eyes involuntarily scanned the crowds again, looking for a glimpse of grey eyes, of a charcoal coat. But Daniel was nowhere in sight. It was just a mistake, a random mix-up in the chaos of New York City. That's what she told herself. What she didn't know was that Daniel had stopped by a column just outside the sliding doors, watching her from a distance as she walked away. That he was still thinking about the hug, the warmth, the way her voice cracked when she said, "I missed you." It was supposed to be nothing. But sometimes the heart remembers things long before the mind catches up. The next morning arrived grey and undecided, like the city couldn't quite figure out whether it wanted to rain or shine. In a quiet corner of Queens, nestled between a pawn shop and a laundromat, stood Rosie's Diner, a modest place with red vinyl booths, worn menus, and the smell of burnt coffee and butter that clung to the air like a memory. Emily Parker had been working there for almost 2 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And in a world that had taken too much too soon, honesty had its own quiet kind of beauty. She was behind the counter, tying her apron, when the bell above the door jingled. She barely looked up. Mornings were always slow. A few regulars, Mr. Johnson reading his paper, a tired nurse from the night shift, 2 college kids half asleep over pancakes. Same routine, same rhythm. "Can I help you?" she asked without turning. "I'll have a coffee," came a deep, familiar voice, "but only if you make it." Her hands froze. Slowly she looked up, heart racing, only to find him standing there. Daniel, the stranger from the airport. He looked out of place in Rosie's. His coat was neatly pressed, his scarf loosely tied around his neck, his shoes too clean for this floor. But he didn't seem uncomfortable. He stood like a man who'd been here before, like this was part of his morning routine. "You again?" she said, half laughing, half stunned. "I figured it was my turn to surprise you," he said, sliding into a booth by the window. Emily blinked, her mouth slightly open. "Did you follow me?" His lips curled into a smile. "No. I Googled best terrible coffee in Queens and this place came up." She raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he relented. "Maybe I asked around. You made an impression, Emily Parker." She tried to hide her blush as she poured coffee into a white chipped mug. "You remembered my name?" "Of course," he said, accepting the cup. "Not every day someone hugs me at an airport like they've known me all their life." "And you're really here just for coffee?" Daniel met her gaze. "Let's say I was curious." Curious. That word lingered in the air longer than it should have. She glanced at the cook in the back who was too busy flipping bacon to care. Then at the clock. Then back at him. "Well, Daniel, enjoy your curiosity. The coffee's on the house." He smiled, and something about it made her pulse skip. It wasn't a practiced, polished grin. It was real, slightly crooked, like he wasn't used to smiling often, but for some reason, today he couldn't help it. She moved back behind the counter, pretending to wipe something down that didn't need wiping. But she kept sneaking glances. Who just shows up like that? A complete stranger. Rich-looking, confident, definitely not from this side of town, sitting in a corner diner like it was his local haunt. She didn't know whether to feel flattered, confused, or nervous, probably all three. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. Every morning, right around 8 a.m., Daniel would walk through the door of Rosie's like clockwork. Always sat at the same booth, always ordered the same thing, black coffee and 2 slices of toast, no butter, and he always asked that Emily be the one to make it. The first time she joked about it. "You know, other people here know how to use a coffee machine too." He just replied, "Maybe, but they're not you." The second time she asked if he had a secret agenda. He answered with a shrug. "Maybe I just like hearing your voice when you're not apologizing." By the third time, she stopped questioning it. There was something oddly comforting about seeing him there. His presence disrupted the monotony of her days. She started looking forward to the mornings, wondering what shirt he'd be wearing, whether he'd order something new, or what odd, charming thing he might say next. Their conversations were never long, a few words here and there, but each one seemed to matter more than it should have. She found herself laughing more, and smiling when he wasn't looking. But she also kept a quiet guard around her heart, because men like Daniel didn't just walk into diners like Rosie's without a reason. And whatever that reason was, it couldn't be simple. One particular morning, as she set down his coffee, she noticed a small scar near his temple she hadn't seen before. "Where's that from?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked up, surprised. "This? Childhood accident. I ran into a glass door I thought was open." She chuckled. "Didn't peg you for the clumsy type." He leaned back. "We all have chapters we don't read out loud." There it was again, that unexpected depth. Like something in him was heavy, hidden just beneath the surface. He wasn't just a man in a suit. There were stories in his silence. Emily wanted to know them, but she didn't dare ask. Not yet. Later that afternoon, as she was sweeping near the front, her co-worker Jenna nudged her. "That guy's been coming in a lot lately," she said with a smirk. Emily rolled her eyes. "It's nothing." "Sure," Jenna teased, "because random hot guys in $1,000 coats always hang around diners just for toast." Emily didn't respond, because deep down she knew Jenna was right. Daniel Whitmore wasn't just coming for the coffee, and Emily Parker wasn't just serving it. There was something building between them, slowly, quietly, like the first light of dawn before the sun dares to rise, and neither of them knew what would happen when it finally did. By the end of the week, Daniel had become a fixture in Emily's morning routine. He didn't act like someone passing through. He didn't rush in with phone calls blaring or eyes glued to a screen like most men in suits. He came in quietly, always at 8:04 a.m. Never earlier, never later. And each time he sat in the same booth by the window, letting the soft morning light spill across the table as if he had nowhere else to be. At first, Emily had assumed it was a phase. Curiosity, maybe. Amusement. A man with more money than sense, killing time. But as the days passed, that theory didn't hold. Daniel wasn't killing time. He was choosing to spend it. With her. And it wasn't just the coffee, or the toast. He didn't touch the toast half the time. What he did was watch. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, not possessive or invasive. He watched like someone who noticed things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. How she always gave extra syrup to the nurse who came in after night shifts. How her smile changed slightly depending on who she was talking to, genuine for some, guarded for others. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't flirt. He just listened. "Do you always sit in silence like that?" she asked one morning, sliding into the seat across from him during a slow hour, arms crossed, apron dusted with flour. Daniel looked up from his coffee. "Only when the silence says more than words would." She tilted her head, amused. "You practice these lines in front of a mirror?" He smirked. "Only on Thursdays." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. It surprised even her. The sound felt foreign in her chest, like something she'd misplaced and only just remembered how to use. From that moment on, their silences became comfortable. Some mornings, he'd ask about her regulars. "Does Mr. Johnson always order waffles and read the sports section at the same time? How come the cook refuses to wear gloves? What's the story with the woman who always orders tea but never drinks it?" Emily would answer between refills, giving short, amused replies. But as time passed, her words grew longer, deeper. She told him about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment over a grocery store, about how her mom used to sing to her while cooking, how she and Tyler had once made a pact to never let each other feel alone, how things changed after the accident, after her mom died, after her dad walked away, saying he wasn't built for this kind of life. She didn't mean to share all of it. The words just slipped, and Daniel never interrupted. He didn't offer pity. He didn't say "I'm sorry" in that mechanical way people did when they didn't know what else to say. He just nodded, absorbing every word like it mattered. Sometimes he shared things too, pieces, not wholes. His favorite poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, a scar on his shoulder from a childhood fall, the fact that he didn't know how to swim, that he didn't like birthdays, not even his own, that he often felt more at home in small places than in the sprawling penthouse where he lived. "Big spaces feel lonelier," he said once, eyes focused on the window. "You'd think it'd be the opposite. But when there's too much room, the silence echoes." Emily understood more than he knew. One rainy morning, she brought him a piece of banana bread she'd made at home. "No butter?" he asked, teasing. "Just trust me," she said. He took a bite and paused. You know, I've eaten in restaurants where the dessert costs more than this entire diner, but this tastes like childhood." She smiled, a soft blush rising in her cheeks. That's what it's supposed to taste like. They didn't speak for a while after that. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, something real. The regulars began to notice. "You two got a thing going?" the nurse asked one day with a wink. Emily rolled her eyes but didn't deny it, because something was going on, something that didn't have a name. Not yet. A few days later, Emily found herself waiting at the window when 8 a.m. came. By 8:05, Daniel still hadn't arrived. 8:10. Nothing. 8:15. Her hand tightened around the coffee pot. She tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he was busy, maybe something came up, but something about the empty booth felt louder than the whole diner. And then, at 8:22, the bell above the door jingled, and there he was. His coat was wet, hair windblown, eyes tired. "You're late," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice cracked just a little. Daniel looked straight at her. "I know. I didn't like it either." And that was it. No apologies, no excuses, just a truth that sat between them like an invisible thread. He sat down in his booth, and Emily poured the coffee without asking. Something was changing. Not fast, not loud, but like the quiet pull of a tide. Each day, each look, each carefully chosen word, it all added up to something neither of them could deny, but neither of them dared speak it yet. Because when something feels too fragile, too rare, even naming it feels like a risk. So they stayed in their rhythm. Coffee, glances, half-smiles, shared silences, and in that unspoken space between them, a connection deeper than either of them had planned was slowly, silently, growing roots. Emily hadn't seen Daniel in 3 days. Not that she was counting, except she was. The space he left behind in Rosie's diner felt noticeable, too noticeable. The booth by the window sat empty, the sunlight spilling across it like it was waiting for someone. Every morning she found herself glancing at the clock more than she'd like to admit, pouring his usual black coffee before realizing he wasn't coming in. And yet, she told herself, it didn't matter. It wasn't like they were anything. He was a stranger turned ritual, a wealthy, mysterious man who'd wandered into her routine like a poem scribbled in the margins of her life. But that didn't explain why her chest ached every time that bell didn't ring at 8:04. It wasn't until the 4th morning that he returned. No fanfare, no explanations. Just Daniel, standing at the counter looking tired, his coat dusted with cold morning air. "You disappeared," she said, trying not to sound like she'd missed him. "I had something to take care of," he said, voice quieter than usual. She nodded, pretending to accept that, though every part of her wanted to ask more. He sat in his usual booth. She brought his coffee without asking. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel looked up, his eyes darker than usual. "You once said your brother's name is Luke, right?" Her hands stilled. "Yeah. Why?" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "I made a few calls, looked into some things." Emily frowned. "What things?" "I know you've been trying to get him on a transplant list," he said. "I know you've been turned away because you don't have the right insurance, and because you don't meet the income threshold for some of the programs." Her throat tightened. "How do you—" "Doesn't matter," he cut in softly. "What matters is I can help." She stared at him, stunned. "Daniel, this isn't coffee and toast. This is my brother's life." "I know. And you're saying you can fix it?" "I can get him on the list. I can cover everything, surgery, aftercare, meds, all of it. The best team, the best hospital." Her chest rose and fell. "Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love fade away while the world keeps spinning, and because I can." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "People like you don't just help for nothing." Daniel met her gaze. "No, they don't." She braced herself. "I don't want anything conventional," he said. "Not money, not favors, not your gratitude." "Then what?" He was silent for a long time. Then, "Come cook for me." She blinked. "What?" "In my apartment. Dinner. every night. Nothing fancy. Just what you made at home. Real food. Why would you want that? Because I haven't had a meal that meant anything in a very long time. I've eaten in places with Michelin stars where the food looked like art, but tasted like cold air. I want food that has soul. And I want it from you. She stared at him, her heart racing. That's it? That's it. Emily didn't know what to make of it. The proposal wasn't romantic. It wasn't a trick. It felt human, strangely intimate but not inappropriate, like he was asking her to bring something honest into a world where everything felt artificial. I'm not a chef, she said cautiously. I don't want a chef. I'm not sure I trust you. You shouldn't, he said, half smiling. But I've already scheduled the first consult for Luke. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Her mouth fell open. You what? I wasn't going to offer anything I couldn't deliver, he said. You can say no. I won't cancel the appointment. I'll still pay for it. But if you say yes, it won't just be a transaction. It'll be an exchange, something real. Emily pressed her palms against the counter, steadying herself. Cooking dinner, in his home, every night. It sounded absurd, ridiculous, completely out of step with her life. And yet it didn't feel wrong, it felt honest, in a way nothing else had in years. I'll think about it, she said. Daniel nodded once, finished his coffee, and stood. As he reached the door, he turned back. There's one more thing. What? I'm not doing this out of charity, Emily. Then why? Because I think your presence might be the one thing that doesn't lie. And with that, he walked out. She stood there long after he was gone, heart pounding, the words echoing in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. He didn't ask for her affection, or her loyalty, or her body. He asked for her food, her presence, her time. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything else ever had. Emily had never set foot in a building like this before. The elevator walls were lined with dark mahogany, polished to a mirror-like shine. Her reflection stared back at her, jeans, sweater, a worn canvas bag over her shoulder, holding containers of home-cooked food. She felt like a visitor in someone else's story, like she didn't belong. The elevator chimed. Penthouse. She stepped out into a hallway so quiet, she could hear the sound of her own breathing. The door in front of her was tall, dark, and heavy. She knocked twice, her knuckles barely grazing the wood. It opened almost immediately. Daniel stood there, dressed casually for the first time. Black t-shirt, bare feet, sleeves revealing lean arms and the faint outline of a scar near his elbow. He looked less billionaire, more man. Right on time, he said, stepping aside. Emily hesitated before walking in. The space was sleek and minimalist, floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral tones, expensive art that looked too abstract to be meaningful. But despite the luxury, something about it felt cold. No clutter, no warmth, no fingerprints on the windows, no signs of life. She walked toward the open kitchen, placing the containers on the marble counter. I hope you weren't expecting anything fancy, she said, removing the lids. It's just beef stew, the kind my mom used to make when money was tight and winter came too early. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching her. That's exactly what I hoped for. She blinked, surprised. I'm serious, he said. I don't want restaurant food. I want food that reminds someone of being loved. They ate at a small table near the window, overlooking the city lights. Emily noticed the silence again. Not awkward, just quiet, like they didn't need to fill it with noise. He asked about the stew. She told him how her mother used to hum while cooking it, how the smell would fill their apartment and make it feel like home, even when the heater didn't work. Daniel listened the way most people didn't anymore, fully, without checking his phone, without waiting for his turn to speak. And then, somewhere between the last spoonful and the warm tea she made after, he spoke. My mother used to burn everything, he said softly. Toast, rice, even water. Emily smiled. How do you burn water? She managed, he said with a soft chuckle. She was always rushing, always somewhere else in her mind. He looked out the window. She died when I was 15. Emily's smile faded. I'm sorry. She wasn't cruel, just absent. My father was worse. He filled the house with noise and made sure we all felt like guests in his world. She said nothing. just waited. Eventually I learned that silence wasn't peace. It was punishment. That's probably why I fill my days with deals and numbers and boardrooms, because quiet makes everything echo. Emily felt her chest tighten. Daniel glanced at her. But your silence doesn't feel empty. She looked down at her cup. Maybe because I'm used to holding the silence for others. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening, but when she left, Daniel walked her to the elevator. And as the doors began to close, he said, "Tomorrow, same time." She nodded. It became their rhythm. Every night, Emily brought a meal, dishes from her childhood, mac and cheese with paprika, chicken pot pie with a golden crust, lentil soup so thick it could stand on its own. Each one came with a story, and each story pulled a thread loose from Daniel's tightly stitched walls. One night, after a spicy tomato pasta, he told her about a panic attack he once had during a board meeting, how no one noticed because he'd trained himself to keep smiling. Another night, while she washed dishes, he told her about the time he ran away at 16 and slept in Central Park for 2 nights before his father found him and dragged him back, not with concern, but with fury. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The way he said it, with that raw, unvarnished honesty, was enough to crack something open between them. Emily listened, always, and in return, she let him see parts of her too. Her frustration at not being able to do more for Luke, her fear of becoming stuck in a life of just enough, her guilt about sometimes wanting something more. They never touched, never flirted, but the intimacy that grew between them was deeper than either had expected. It was in the way he watched her stir soup, his eyes softening like the broth she simmered. It was in the way she remembered how he liked his tea, no sugar, lots of lemon, even before he ever asked. It was in the quiet moments when they didn't need to speak at all. One evening she found a worn book of poetry on his shelf, Rainer Maria Rilke, just like he'd mentioned. She opened it and found a note in the margin, written in small, slanted handwriting. "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart." She didn't ask about it, but that night the silence between them was full of understanding. And yet, a question hovered at the edges of it all. What are we becoming? Emily felt it every time she walked through that apartment door, and Daniel felt it every time she left, but neither dared name it, not yet. Because some things, once spoken, can't be taken back. The night had started with good intentions. It was a quiet Friday. Daniel had mentioned a charity gala he had to attend, some corporate obligation tied to a hospital foundation. Emily had rolled her eyes when he first brought it up. "I don't own anything close to gala appropriate," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Wear what makes you feel like yourself," he replied. "That's the only thing I want in the room with me." She laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. And so she stood beside him later that night in the back seat of a black town car, her heartbeat louder than the hum of city traffic. She wore a long navy blue dress she had borrowed from a friend. It didn't sparkle. It didn't scream. But it made her feel calm, like she hadn't betrayed who she was just to stand beside him. Daniel wore a tailored black suit. Not a single thing about him was out of place. And yet, when he looked at her, he smiled like she was the most shocking, beautiful thing in the room. She had never seen that smile before. The gala was held at a rooftop venue overlooking the East River. String lights floated overhead. Jazz music danced through the air and polished guests floated between champagne glasses and shallow conversation. Emily felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's dream. Daniel never left her side. He introduced her to people, but never labeled her. Never said friend or guest. He let her exist beside him without a definition, like she had every right to be there, even if she didn't believe it yet. At one point, during a lull in the speeches, he leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her palms were sweating. "You look like you're holding your breath," he murmured. "I am." He chuckled and reached for her hand, not tightly, just enough to anchor her. She looked up at him, surprised. But in his eyes she saw no performance, no agenda, only presence. A photographer passed by and raised a camera, and before Emily could react, the flash went off, twice. She blinked, dazed. "Did that just—" "Yeah," Daniel said softly. It did. He didn't seem bothered, but something inside her coiled tight. The photo hit the internet the next morning. It wasn't on a gossip site at first. It appeared on a corporate news blog that covered philanthropy events and high society functions. The headline read, "Reclusive billionaire Daniel Whitmore makes rare public appearance with mystery woman." There it was, Emily's face, smiling, slightly nervous, her hand half held in Daniel's. The background blurred, but she was unmistakable. By noon, the picture had been picked up by half a dozen other sites. The comments were instant, ruthless. "She looks like a waitress." "Gold digger vibes." Another nobody trying to climb the ladder. "Maybe she works for him." "Cleaner." "Assistant." Emily stared at her phone, heart pounding. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were said, as if her entire worth could be summarized by a single image and someone else's assumptions. By the end of the day, someone had dug up her social media, old photos of her in the diner, pictures with Luke, comments from years ago taken out of context. She turned her phone off, but the shame stayed. She didn't go to Daniel's apartment that night. She didn't text, didn't answer when he called, didn't return his voice messages. Instead, she sat on the fire escape outside her tiny apartment, knees pulled to her chest, watching the city blur under a drizzle of cold rain. How had something so quiet turned into something so loud? It had been theirs, this unspoken, slow-burning connection, and now it was exposed. Picked apart by people who didn't know her name, who didn't care about truth. Only the image, the story. Emily wasn't afraid of being seen. She was afraid of being misunderstood, of being reduced to a punchline in someone else's narrative. The next morning she showed up for her shift at the diner, head down, no makeup. Jenna, her co-worker, gave her a sad smile and patted her shoulder. "Don't read the comments," she said gently. "I already did," Emily murmured. Later that day, as she was pouring coffee for a customer, the bell above the door rang. She didn't need to look up to know it was him. Daniel sat in his usual booth, waited, didn't demand. After a moment, she brought his coffee and placed it gently on the table. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft. "No." He nodded, as if he'd expected that. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he said. "The photo." "I know," she said. "But it did." Daniel exhaled. "Emily, I've been in the public eye my whole life. This happens. They'll forget it by next week." She looked at him, eyes hard. "They don't know me, and yet they've already decided who I am. They don't get to decide." "No," she whispered, "but they shout louder than I ever could." Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I want you to see something." She hesitated, then took it. It was a letter from a young woman in Connecticut. It read, "I saw the photo, and for the first time I thought, maybe someone like me could belong in a world like his. Thank you." Emily stared at it, blinking. "There's always someone watching," Daniel said, "and sometimes what you think is shame turns into hope for someone else." She didn't answer, but she sat down in the booth across from him, and that was something. Still inside her, a storm rumbled, because now the world had eyes on them, and eyes came with expectations, assumptions, judgments. What they had built was fragile, private, and now it wasn't. What would survive the weight of public scrutiny? She didn't know. And that uncertainty lingered, long after the coffee had gone cold. The envelope wasn't supposed to be opened. It had been tucked inside a box of old cookbooks Emily hadn't touched in years, recipes written in her mother's looping cursive, splattered with sauce stains and love. She had gone searching for a soup her brother Luke used to love as a kid, something simple for the recovery week after his latest treatment. Instead, she found paper she didn't recognize. Official. Cold. A property transfer record, her mother's signature, and the name of the buyer, Whitmore Holdings LLC. Her hands went numb. She read it again, and again. Then she flipped through the rest of the papers. Contracts, financial statements, the foreclosure notice they'd all tried to forget. Tucked into a side pocket was an article clipped from the New York Financial Tribune, dated 2 years ago. Whitmore Holdings acquires local real estate portfolio in Brooklyn, expanding East Coast influence. There it was, the name. The name she'd never questioned, the one she now couldn't unsee. Daniel's name. The company that had bought the Parker family's old restaurant after it collapsed under debt and heartbreak. The place her father had built. The only dream they'd ever truly shared before he left. The place her mother had begged the bank to save. The place Emily had scrubbed tables in at 9 years old while Luke colored napkins behind the counter. Her world spun. The man who had fed her hope had once owned the deed to her family's downfall. She didn't go to his apartment that night. She didn't respond to his messages. She didn't even know what to feel. Anger, betrayal, confusion, all tangled into a silence too heavy for words. The next day she showed up at his building unannounced. Daniel opened the door and saw it in her eyes. Something had broken. "I need to talk to you," she said. He stepped aside without asking questions. She placed the papers on his countertop one by one, like evidence in a case she never wanted to file. "Did you know?" she asked, voice tight. Daniel scanned the documents slowly. When he reached the buyer's name, his jaw tightened. "No," he said. Emily stared at him. "You expect me to believe that?" He looked up. "Whitmore Holdings buys hundreds of properties a year. Some are shells, some are flips, some are investments I never see. I didn't know, Emily, I swear." She crossed her arms. "My family lost everything. We cried over that place. We blamed ourselves. We thought we failed. I didn't take it from you." "No," she said, tears rising. "But you held the pen when someone else did." Daniel walked around the counter slowly. "Emily, I would never hurt you. But you did." His face dropped like the weight of her words physically struck him. "I trusted you," she whispered. He didn't say anything, and that, more than anything, broke her. She left before he could stop her, took the elevator alone. Her reflection in the gold-plated walls looked like a stranger. When she got outside, she breathed in the cold air like it might stitch her back together, but it didn't. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel seen. She felt erased. Daniel didn't reach out that night or the next, but Emily knew he would. Still, she didn't know if she wanted him to, because this wasn't about a mistake. It was about the way pain travels. How it hides in systems and signatures, in corporate layers so deep you don't even know who held the knife. She hadn't expected this story to be perfect, but she hadn't expected the cracks to run through her past either. Days passed. Luke noticed. "You're quieter," he said. Emily smiled weakly. "Just tired." He didn't press, but she knew he knew. On the 4th day, a package arrived at her door. No name, no note. Inside, a single yellowed photograph of her family's old restaurant. Clean, intact, the sign freshly painted. Beneath it, a letter, handwritten, from Daniel. "Emily, I didn't know, but now I do. And I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to have what was taken. Not as a gift, not as payment, as return, as restoration. The keys are yours. The deed, too. I've spent years building things that meant nothing. This one means something." Tears slipped down her cheek as she folded the letter. He hadn't asked for anything, no explanation, no plea, just a gesture. But gestures didn't erase history. And love, she'd learned, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about staying when it hurt, about choosing again after the truth surfaced. Could she do that? Could he? The building hadn't changed much. The paint was new, sure. The windows cleaner. The sidewalk out front had been swept, and the door now bore a brass handle instead of the old chipped wood one. But the bones were the same. Emily stood on the curb, frozen in place, keys trembling in her hand. Her name was on the deed. She hadn't believed it until she held the envelope herself, saw the legal transfer. Everything Daniel promised, he'd done. Quietly. Completely. No ceremony. No expectation. Just a key and a note. Now she stood in front of the old family restaurant, reborn. A place that had once held her childhood, her parents' dreams, her earliest memories of warmth and community and purpose, now returned to her hands. She pressed the key into the lock and opened the door. The smell hit her first. Clean wood, fresh paint, faint hints of lemon oil and possibility. The space had been gutted and restored. The old counter had been rebuilt, the floor tiles replaced, but in the same pattern as before, blue and cream, like her mother once picked out with pride. There were new appliances, stainless steel and humming, but everything else felt familiar, like someone had reached into her memory and pieced it back together. And then she saw it. Mounted on the back wall behind the counter in carved wood, Parker Family Kitchen. She blinked hard, her breath catching. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a heartbeat restored. She walked through slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of tables, bar stools, the smooth marble of the counter. There were handwritten notes taped to the fridge, measurements, supply orders, menus half-drafted. Someone had already begun prepping it for use. And yet, it waited for her. Like it knew. She sat down on the bench by the front window, the same spot where she used to do homework while her mom kneaded dough. For a moment, she let herself remember it all. The late nights, the burnt toast, the loud laughter, her dad's big voice shouting over the radio, the smell of cinnamon and grease and love, the fights, the dreams, the day the locks were changed, and now, this. That night, Daniel didn't call. He didn't come. Emily wasn't sure if she wanted him to, but she kept hearing his voice in her head. Not as a gift, not as payment, as return, as restoration. He hadn't tried to fix her pain with promises. He hadn't justified the past. He had just given it back, without pride, without applause, without himself in the spotlight. She thought about everything they'd shared, meals, silence, secrets. The nights she'd cooked while he sat nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes just breathing in the scent of garlic or cumin like it grounded him. There had always been an unspoken honesty between them. But this was louder than words. A week passed. Emily visited the restaurant every day. She brought in old photos to hang on the wall, began rewriting the menu on brown parchment with a pencil stub. She opened windows, let the place breathe again. Luke came to see it, cried in the middle of the empty dining area. "It feels like Mom," he whispered. That was all the validation Emily needed. She hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Open it, rent it, sell it, or maybe just let it exist as proof that some things could come back. But what kept her up at night wasn't the future of the building. It was Daniel. He hadn't reached out again. Not once. No calls, no letters, no visits. And she wondered, was that his way of giving space, or of letting her go? Part of her wanted to storm into his penthouse and demand an answer. Part of her was afraid to hear one. Until one evening she returned to the restaurant and found a single thing left on the front counter. A brown paper bag. Inside, a loaf of banana bread. Her banana bread. The one she'd made for him on their third dinner. The one he said tasted like childhood. On the outside of the bag, scribbled in messy ink, "For the chef who fed me when I forgot what hunger was." No name. No return address. Just that. Emily stood there, heart pounding, tears in her eyes, the bag pressed against her chest. He wasn't asking to be let back in. He wasn't forcing a reunion. But he had left her something of himself. A reminder, an echo, and maybe a choice. She turned off the lights of the restaurant and stood in the dark, her silhouette framed by the street lamp outside. The space was silent. But it wasn't empty anymore, because something had been restored. Not just the restaurant, but the truth. The gesture didn't undo the pain, but it honored it. And that was the beginning of something new. Something she wasn't ready to name. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to feel. The hospital smelled like bleach and waiting. Emily sat in the cold, hard plastic chair outside the emergency room, her hands trembling around a styrofoam cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The clock above the nurse's station ticked with cruel precision. Every second stretched like an hour. Luke had collapsed that morning. She'd found him on the bathroom floor, pale, clammy, struggling to speak. The ambulance came fast, but not fast enough to quiet the scream that had lodged itself somewhere in her chest. Now she waited. Again. The doctor finally emerged, clipboard in hand, face unreadable. "He's stable," he said, "but his body's under stress. His numbers are off. We'll need to monitor him closely." Emily exhaled, her entire body folding into itself. Relief came like a wave crashing over brittle stone. "But he's okay," she asked, barely above a whisper. "For now." She nodded. That "for now" clung to her like static. It wasn't until she sat back down that she realized someone else had arrived. A familiar presence. Daniel. He stood just a few feet away, wearing a dark coat, his eyes steady. He didn't speak, didn't ask permission. He simply walked over and sat in the chair beside her. Emily didn't look at him right away. She couldn't. If she looked, she'd fall apart. But his nearness settled something inside her, like a lighthouse in fog, like an answer that didn't need words. "I saw the ambulance," he said quietly. "I followed it." "You didn't have to." "I know." She gripped the cup harder, coffee sloshing. They sat in silence for a long time, just the hum of machines, footsteps, distant murmurs of other lives in crisis. Finally, she said, "You didn't call. I didn't know if you wanted me to." Emily turned to him then, really looking. His face was tired, but not broken. There was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a patience. "You gave me back my family's dream," she said, "and then you disappeared. I thought you needed space to decide what you felt. Not because I wanted anything, just because I didn't want to make it harder." Emily's throat tightened. "And what if I decided I didn't want you in my life anymore?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Then I'd stay away, but I wouldn't stop caring." That cracked something. She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what this is between us." "I don't either," he said. "But I know I'm not walking away unless you ask me to." More silence. Then, softly, she asked, "Why did you come today?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice quiet but unwavering. "Because I knew you'd be here. Alone. And I didn't want that for you." Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. He didn't try to wipe them, didn't try to make her smile. He just sat there, unmoving, present. And that, more than anything, made her feel safe. Later, when the nurse said Luke was awake and allowed visitors, Emily stood. Daniel rose too, but didn't follow. She looked back at him. "You coming?" she asked. He blinked. "You sure?" She nodded once. "He's been asking about you." Daniel's expression softened, surprise flickering across his face like a candle catching light. They walked down the hallway side by side. Not touching, not talking, but something had shifted, not in fireworks, but in something deeper. Daniel didn't promise to fix anything. He didn't say he loved her. But when Luke reached for Emily's hand and whispered, "I'm glad you're not alone anymore," something in her heart finally unclenched. Because love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a man sitting beside you in a hospital waiting quietly for you to breathe again. That night, she didn't go home. Neither of them spoke the words. But when Daniel opened the door to his apartment and she walked in behind him, it wasn't for dinner. It was to sit on the floor of the kitchen, backs against the cabinets, drinking tea from mismatched mugs in silence. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the truest kind of love doesn't arrive wrapped in declarations. It shows up when everything else falls apart, and stays. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen. Emily stood barefoot in front of the stove, wearing a white apron dusted with flour. Her hair was tied up messily, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the oven. Across the counter, Daniel was chopping onions, badly. "Careful," she warned, smiling. "You're going to lose a finger." "I've survived hostile boardrooms and a plane malfunction at 30,000 feet, he said. "I think I can handle produce." He immediately dropped a slice. Emily laughed. The kitchen was theirs now. Not in theory, in rhythm. It wasn't her cooking for him anymore. It was them, burning toast, arguing over recipes, measuring salt with their hands instead of spoons. It was Daniel learning the names of vegetables he used to ignore, and Emily humming again while she cooked, just like her mother used to. It was domestic, ordinary, and utterly sacred. They had never had a wedding, not a real one. Their first marriage had been on paper, an administrative necessity to get Luke the insurance coverage he needed. So a quiet, desperate agreement signed in the back of a lawyer's office. No rings, no vows, no kiss. But now, things were different. They were still legally married, but emotionally, they were just beginning. One Thursday afternoon, the restaurant had closed early for renovations in the back. The sun was setting, spilling golden light through the front windows. Emily was icing a cake she didn't plan to serve to anyone, and Daniel was sweeping under the tables, grumbling about flower conspiracies. She didn't see it coming, not until she turned around, wiping her hands on a cloth, and found him kneeling, not with a ring but with a wooden spoon in one hand and a smile in the other. "Really?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "A spoon?" "It's symbolic," he replied. "You once fed me when I didn't know I was hungry." She crossed her arms. "So, this is how you propose?" "No," he said seriously. "That time in the lawyer's office, that wasn't a proposal. That was survival." He stood slowly, spoon still in hand. "This is me choosing you. Again. Not for help, not for convenience, not because of Luke, but because somewhere between burnt onions and banana bread, I fell in love with the girl who hugged a stranger in an airport." Her eyes filled instantly. Daniel stepped closer. "And now I want to keep burning things with you for the rest of my life." She laughed through the tears. He held out the spoon like it was the most sacred object in the world. "Emily Parker, will you marry me again? But this time properly, with dancing and bad vows and maybe a ring if you insist." She didn't take the spoon. She stepped forward and kissed him, flower and all. "I thought you'd never ask," she whispered. They didn't plan a grand ceremony, just a small gathering behind the restaurant. Friends, family. Luke, now stronger, beaming in a suit that didn't quite fit. Jenna from the diner. Mr. Johnson. Even the nurse who used to order extra syrup. Emily wore a simple dress and no shoes. Daniel wore his heart on his sleeve. Their vows were imperfect. They stumbled, laughed, got emotional. Daniel forgot half of what he'd written and ad-libbed something about burned toast being the true symbol of love. They sealed it with a kiss that didn't try to be anything other than real, and when they opened the restaurant doors for dancing, the first song was one Emily's mother used to sing in the kitchen. Daniel didn't know the steps, but he let her lead. Later that night, when the last guest had left and the lights were dim, they sat at one of the tables with slices of leftover cake, feet bare, hearts full. Emily looked at him across the table. "Do you think we would have found each other if I hadn't hugged you by mistake?" Daniel grinned. "Probably not." "So, a mistake saved us?" "No," he said softly. "You saved me. The mistake just pointed me in the right direction." Outside, the city moved on. But inside that little corner of the world, two people had chosen each other again. Not because they had to, but because they finally wanted to. The honeymoon was never a destination. It was a feeling. And for Emily and Daniel, that feeling didn't arrive in Paris or on a tropical beach. It came in the form of burnt toast on a Monday morning, mismatched socks, and a leaky kitchen faucet that no one ever seemed to fix. They woke up each day not as characters in a fairy tale, but as two very real people trying, sometimes gracefully, sometimes clumsily, to share a life. The restaurant, Parker Family Kitchen, reopened with humble dreams and loud mornings. Luke took over inventory. Daniel managed the books. Emily ran the kitchen like a symphony of chaos and comfort. They were far from perfect. Daniel still used too many pans for one simple dish. Emily sometimes snapped when the pressure got too high. They forgot to buy milk, argued about whether garlic belonged in mashed potatoes, laughed at burnt casseroles, made up with forehead kisses in the pantry when no one was watching. And through it all, they chose each other, over and over. One rainy evening, Emily came home from the grocery store soaking wet, arms full of produce, only to find Daniel dancing in the kitchen with the radio turned up, socks sliding on the tile floor. He reached for her hand without a word. She laughed, breathless. "You're ridiculous." "You married ridiculous," he said, twirling her clumsily. In those moments, love wasn't a dramatic crescendo. It was rhythm. It was a soft song playing in the background while the world outside stormed. Luke began to thrive. He gained weight, color, confidence. He started dating, applied to culinary school, talked about writing a cookbook for people who grew up poor, teaching them how to feed their families with both dignity and flavor. One night, he said quietly to Emily, "You gave me back my life. She shook her head. No, I just fought for it. You didn't do it alone. She smiled. None of us do. Daniel changed too, slowly, deeply. He let go of boardrooms and headlines, began to trade in hours for meaning. He still had investments, still wore suits when needed, but he also had dirt under his nails from gardening out back, scars on his hands from learning to use a kitchen knife properly, and flour in his hair more often than he liked to admit. He stopped running from silence, started listening to it instead. Sometimes Emily would catch him staring at her across the restaurant, his expression soft, awed, like he couldn't quite believe this was his life. She'd smirk. What? He'd shake his head. Nothing. Just watching my heart beat outside my body. And she'd blush like the girl who once hugged a stranger at the airport, not realizing she was about to change her life. Of course, there were hard days too. Days when they didn't agree, when work was too much, when Luke had setbacks, when old fears crept in like shadows. Emily sometimes panicked, afraid this was all too good, too fragile, like glass pretending to be steel. Daniel sometimes withdrew, silent, brooding, haunted by a past that didn't always stay buried. But even in those moments they never stopped choosing. They didn't slam doors. They didn't threaten to leave. They learned to pause, to cool down, to say I'm sorry before pride took root. They learned that love wasn't a feeling that floated freely. It was a discipline, a decision, a daily promise. One night, after the restaurant closed, they lay on the couch, limbs tangled, watching a terrible movie. Daniel traced lazy circles on Emily's arm. You think we've made it? She looked at him, amused. Made what? This life, love, whatever this is. She thought for a long moment, then said, No, I don't think we've made it. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, I think we're still making it. One mistake, one laugh, one meal at a time. Daniel smiled. That sounds exhausting. She kissed his shoulder. That sounds real. And in the quiet that followed, neither of them said it, but both knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the middle. The part no one writes books about. The part where love breathes, where it lives. But something new was coming. They just didn't know it yet. Something that would once again turn their world upside down, not in destruction, but in creation. Because sometimes the heart makes room for more. The first time Emily held her daughter, the world went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels full, like a held breath, like a sacred pause between heartbeats. Sophie Whitmore Parker was born just after sunrise, in a small hospital room filled with the scent of lavender and antiseptic. Her cry was soft, almost reluctant, but when she opened her eyes, storm grey, just like Daniel's, Emily felt something inside her shift forever. Not break, not burst, just shift. As if her soul had made space for something even bigger than love. The months that followed were a blur of exhaustion and bliss. Daniel was unexpectedly good with a baby. He read to Sophie every night, even when she was too young to understand, books about kindness, adventure, and sometimes poetry. He held her like she was the most fragile and powerful thing in his world. Emily, in turn, found parts of herself returning, pieces she hadn't touched since childhood. She'd hum while rocking Sophie, the same lullabies her mother used to sing. She'd walk barefoot in the restaurant when no one was looking, her daughter pressed against her chest in a wrap, the rhythm of kitchen noise blending with the lull of breathing. It wasn't easy. They were sleep-deprived, overwhelmed, and constantly learning. But somehow, it felt like this version of their life was exactly what all the chaos had been preparing them for. One afternoon, when Sophie was nearly 2, she stood on the kitchen counter, supervised, of course, while Emily made banana bread. Her tiny hands reached for the mixing spoon, smearing dough on the edge of the bowl. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, smile tugging at the edge of his lips. "She's trouble," he said. Emily grinned. "She's us." Later that day, they took a walk through the neighborhood. Sophie rode on Daniel's shoulders, giggling each time he pretended to stumble. Emily walked beside them, hand tucked into his coat pocket, the crisp autumn air brushing her cheeks. At one point, Sophie pointed to an airplane slicing across the sky. Emily looked up and whispered, half to herself, half to the wind, "It started there." Daniel glanced at her. "What did?" She met his eyes. "Everything. That night, Sophie asked a question. It was innocent, the way only a child could ask. 'Mommy, how did you and Daddy meet?' Emily looked at Daniel. He smiled, then nodded for her to go ahead. So she told the story, the short version. "I was waiting for your uncle at the airport," Emily began, tucking Sophie into bed. "I had a little sign and a nervous heart, and then I saw a man who looked like him, and I hugged him." Sophie giggled. "You hugged a stranger?" "I did, and it turned out he wasn't a stranger at all. Just someone I hadn't met yet." Sophie blinked up at her with sleepy eyes. "And then you married him?" "Not right away," Emily said softly, "but that hug. It was the first page of a very long, very beautiful story." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Sophie yawned. "I want to hug someone and get married too." "Maybe someday," Emily smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead, "but only if they bring you banana bread." When Sophie fell asleep, Daniel walked over and wrapped his arms around Emily from behind. She leaned into him. "I still think about that moment," he murmured. "The airport?" He nodded. "You didn't know me, and you hugged me anyway." Emily tilted her head, resting it on his shoulder. "No. I think some part of me already did." They stood there in the quiet, their daughter dreaming behind them, the weight of years soft around their shoulders. There were no more contracts, no more conditions, just this life, messy, loud, honest, and entirely theirs. In the restaurant, they hung a black and white photo behind the counter. It showed Emily and Daniel years ago, standing in front of the stove, laughing, blurry, arms dusted with flour. A handwritten note beneath it read, "Sometimes love begins with a mistake and ends exactly where it was meant to." Customers asked about it all the time, and Emily would just smile, because there are some stories that can't be told in full, only lived. In the end, it wasn't the mistaken hug that changed everything. It was what came after. It was the silences shared, the choices made through pain, and the love that didn't arrive with promises, but with presence. Because true love isn't about perfect endings, it's about continuing to choose someone, even when the world falls apart, even when the past weighs heavy, even when fear tries to speak louder. And you? Have you ever lived a love that began in the most unlikely place? Or maybe it's waiting for a mistake that will turn into destiny? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your like helps the channel grow and continue bringing you emotional stories like this. Share with someone special